r/entitled parents. My boss forced my resignation until I broke my silence. Hashtag chunk 1, the breaking point. I was 3 minutes late to the Monday morning meeting, and somehow, that became the reason my entire career was about to implode. Everyone, before we begin, my boss Mark said, his voice dripping with false concern as 30 pairs of eyes turned toward me, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. My stomach dropped. I'd gotten stuck in traffic on the way back from grabbing coffee for the team, a task Mark had dumped on me at 8:47 a.m., right before this meeting was scheduled to start. I should have known it was a setup. I was beginning to recognize his patterns. Our marketing coordinator here has been struggling, Mark continued, gesturing at me like I was a specimen under a microscope. And frankly, I've been trying to be patient, but it's affecting the entire department's performance. I felt my face flush hot. Around the table, people suddenly became very interested in their laptops and notepads. No one made eye contact. I recognized the fear in their body language because I'd been them once, scared to be next, grateful it wasn't them in the hot seat today. The Riverside campaign. Mark said, shaking his head disappointingly. Complete amateur hour. The Dalton pitch. Practically incomprehensible. I've had to basically redo everything you've touched in the past month. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. None of that was true. The Riverside campaign had tested at 94% favorability with focus groups. The Dalton pitch had landed us a $200,000 contract. Both had my name attached to them, until they'd been presented, and suddenly they were Mark's ideas. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about whether marketing is really the right fit for you, Mark said, his tone almost sympathetic now, which somehow made it worse. This was the tone he used when he wanted witnesses. Maybe you should consider whether you want to submit your resignation, or if we need to have a more formal conversation with HR. The room was utterly silent. I was 26 years old, and I was sitting in front of 2 vice presidents, 3 senior managers, and 12 of my colleagues while my boss, a man I'd once admired, before the real Mark revealed himself, publicly executed my reputation. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. The Riverside campaign exceeded. I don't think this is the forum to discuss your performance issues, Mark interrupted smoothly. But I think you understand what I'm suggesting. We can make this easy, or we can make this difficult. The implication was crystal clear, resign quietly, or we'll fire you for cause and you'll never work in this industry again. I stood up, grabbed my laptop, and walked out of that conference room before anyone could see me completely fall apart. That was 6 hours ago. Now I was sitting in my apartment at midnight, staring at the external hard drive on my desk, the one that had been growing heavier in my conscience for months. Inside it were screenshots, emails, voice recordings of conversations, copies of documents, time-stamped photos, notes with dates and witnesses. An entire archive of Mark's abuse meticulously organized into folders with names like credit theft, discriminatory comments, financial irregularities, and policy violations. I'd started documenting everything 2 months in, back when I thought it might be helpful to have evidence for a constructive conversation. I was naive enough to believe Mark could be reasoned with, that if I just showed him how his behavior was affecting me, he'd reflect and change. That was before I realized I wasn't dealing with someone who cared about my well-being or fairness. I was dealing with a narcissist who saw every interaction as a power play. The hard drive had become my insurance policy, though I never admitted that to myself until tonight. I thought about the 4 people who'd quit in the past 8 months. Sarah, who'd been in the department for 3 years before Mark arrived, had simply stopped showing up one day. Marcus had transferred to a different division, taking a lateral move just to escape. Jennifer and Tony had left the company entirely. I'd gotten drunk with Tony last month, and he told me Mark had told him he'd never work in this city again if he didn't resign quietly. The threat had worked. I thought about the interns who cycled through, who'd arrived bright-eyed and excited, only to return from meetings with Mark looking hollowed out and confused about what they'd done wrong. I thought about how he'd stolen the Riverside campaign from me and presented it as his own at the company-wide meeting, how I'd watched him accept congratulations for work I'd stayed until midnight developing. I thought about the time he'd made a joke about my anxiety disorder in front of the senior partners, laughing as if it was endearing rather than discriminatory. I thought about the spreadsheet I'd seen on his desk, our departmental budget, where money allocated for employee bonuses seemed to have mysteriously vanished into a consulting retainer for a company registered to his wife's name. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, "How was your day, sweetie?" I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until I figured out what the hell I was going to do. There were 2 paths in front of me, and they'd been there for months. I just hadn't had the courage to choose the second one. Path 1, roll over. Update my resume. Send out applications and explain away the employment gap with mutual separation or company restructuring. Let Mark continue to destroy people because it was easier than fighting back. Protect myself and my career prospects by staying silent. Path 2, stop being a victim. I opened my laptop and created a new folder on my desktop. I titled it Decision. Then I picked up my phone and did something I should have done months ago. I opened my email and found the address for corporate HR that I'd been too afraid to contact before. I started typing. My hands shook as I wrote the opening line. I am writing to formally report workplace harassment, discrimination, and financial misconduct conducted by my supervisor, Mark Richardson, in violation of company policy and federal employment law. I didn't send it yet. Not tonight. But tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, I'm going to stop being silent. Hashtag chunk 2, the documentation. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent 7 hours organizing the hard drive into something that looked less like paranoia and more like evidence. The first folder I opened was labeled Credit Theft, and my stomach twisted as I scrolled through it. Screenshots of emails where I'd sent Mark my work with timestamps, followed by his calendar invites to presentations where he'd present those exact ideas as his own. There was the Riverside campaign, my original presentation file showing my name as creator, dated 3 weeks before Mark's version went to senior management. Identical strategy, identical mock-ups, identical copy. Just his name on it. Then there were the voice recordings. 42 of them, dating back to February. I'd started recording our one-on-one meetings after the first time he denied saying something I knew he'd said, something hurtful about my productivity. I'd needed protection. Insurance. A way to ensure my version of events couldn't be disputed. There was one from March 15th. I listened to it again, even though I'd heard it a dozen times. Look, Mark's voice came through, calm and reasonable. I'm not saying you can't do the job. I'm just saying that maybe marketing is more of a personality-driven field. You're a little quiet. A little anxious. It might be better if you took on more behind-the-scenes work while I handle the client-facing stuff. I'd been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder 2 years ago. I'd mentioned it to Mark in confidence during my onboarding, thinking it was relevant to him, knowing I might occasionally need to step away for 5 minutes if I felt overwhelmed. It had become his favorite weapon. Every mistake, no matter how small, was attributed to my mental health. Every success was despite it. My phone buzzed at 4:47 a.m. A Slack notification from work. My heart nearly stopped. It was Mark, sending a message to the entire department. Morning team, just wanted to flag that we've identified some serious gaps in our Q3 deliverables. I've been reviewing the work product and there are some real concerns about quality control. Looking forward to addressing this with HR tomorrow at 10 a.m. Some changes are coming. The message was timestamped from his home network at 4:43 a.m. He was building a case against me in the middle of the night. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I texted back immediately, Mark, it's almost 5 a.m. Please send official performance concerns through proper channels during business hours. His response came 2 minutes later, just keeping the team in the loop. Nothing personal. We're all in this together. Gaslighting. He was gaslighting me in writing, on company infrastructure, for an audience. I took a screenshot and added it to my hard drive. By 6 a.m., I was showered, dressed, and had read through every single email chain I'd saved. There were 47 instances of Mark taking credit for my work across just the past 4 months. 47 times I'd sent him work product and 47 times it had been presented to clients or senior management under his name alone. The pattern was undeniable. But patterns don't always hold up in court, and I was starting to realize that's exactly what this might come to. The problem with my documentation was that it was all very illegal to obtain. Recording people without their consent in a two-party consent state, which it turned out my state actually was a felony. Yes, I'd read the laws at 3 a.m. 43 pages of legal code. The voice recordings were useless. They were actually worse than useless. They made me look like the unstable one. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold next to me and felt something like panic rising in my chest. I'd spent months documenting abuse in ways that might actually incriminate me. By 8:15 a.m., I was Googling employment lawyers. The first 3 had consultation fees of $300 to $500 per hour. I had maybe $2,400 in my savings account after my rent and student loans. One consultation would wipe out nearly a week's worth of emergency fund. But then I found the legal aid section of my state bar association. There was a nonprofit that handled employment law cases for people who couldn't afford representation. They had a form I could fill out. An intake process. I filled it out with shaking hands, explaining my situation as concisely as possible, attaching PDFs of my documentation. The intake coordinator called me back at 10:47 a.m., right in the middle of my scheduled HR meeting with Mark. Hi, this is Denise from the Employment Rights Coalition, a warm voice said. I'm looking at your case intake and I want to ask you a few questions before we determine if we can take you on as a client. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of my office building, unable to bring myself to go inside. Of course, I said, my voice sounding small and far away. First, I need to know about those recordings, Denise said gently. Are you in a two-party consent state? My heart sank. Yes. Okay, so we can't use those. They actually hurt your case more than they help it. But here's what I'm looking at in your documentation that is valuable, the email chains are gold. The screenshots of work product with your name, dated before his presentations, those are excellent. The photos of the budget spreadsheet, those could be useful. When you say financial misconduct, what specifically are you referring to? I explained about the consulting company registered to his wife's name, the money that disappeared from the departmental budget allocation. Do you have access to the actual invoices for those consulting services? Denise asked. No, I only saw the line item on the budget spreadsheet. Right. Okay, here's where we stand, Denise said, and I could hear her leaning back in her chair, thinking. You have a solid case for wage theft and credit theft. The discrimination angle is shakier. One anxiety joke isn't going to get you far, even though it's inappropriate. But if there's a pattern of comments, that strengthens it. The financial misconduct is speculative without hard evidence. What you need to do is gather what you can access legally, anything that's already in company databases that you have legitimate access to. Then we document the hostile work environment based on email communications and your employment record. And you need to be very careful about what you report to HR. What do you mean? I asked. I mean HR often protects the company first and employees second, Denise said carefully. Before you go to them, we need to talk strategy. You need to know exactly what you're walking into. Can you come to our office tomorrow morning at 9? I agreed, and after she hung up, I sat in my car for another 20 minutes staring at the office building entrance, where I could see Mark through the glass doors, laughing with one of the senior partners. He'd won this round. I'd missed the HR meeting, which meant he could now claim I was insubordinate, uncooperative, avoiding accountability. But I wasn't going to let him win the war. #Chunk3. I didn't go back inside that day. I sent an email to Mark at 11:15 a.m. saying I'd received an urgent personal call and needed to leave the office. I didn't ask permission. I didn't explain. I just stated it as fact and hit send from my car. His response came within 40 seconds. This is exactly the kind of behavior we need to discuss. Don't bother coming back today. We'll reschedule with HR. I should have felt scared. Instead, I felt something close to relief. He just created written evidence of his retaliation. I took a screenshot and added it to the folder on my hard drive labeled retaliation. The drive home took 30 minutes, and I spent most of it trying to keep my hands from shaking on the steering wheel. Denise's words kept echoing in my head. HR often protects the company first. That was the part that terrified me, not Mark, but the system itself. The machine that was supposed to protect people like me, but which he'd probably already been working to control. By the time I got home, my phone had exploded. 3 messages in the department Slack channel. The first was from Jessica, one of the junior coordinators who'd managed to survive Mark's regime for almost a year. Hey, everything okay? Mark's being weird about you missing the meeting. The second was from another colleague, Derek, who'd been at the company for 2 years before Mark arrived and had watched it slowly corrode under his management. Just heard Mark told everyone you're having performance issues. FYI, I'm keeping receipts on my own stuff now too. Not trying to start anything but also not getting blindsided. The third message was from Mark himself in a direct message, not the public channel. I'm trying to help you here. You're not making this easy. When you come back, we need to talk about your future at this company. Specifically, whether you have one. That was a threat. A clear, unambiguous threat. I screenshotted it and added it to the hard drive. Then I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in months. I called my mom. Sweetheart. She picked up on the second ring, and hearing her voice almost broke me. Is everything okay? You never called during work. I'm not at work, I said, and then everything came pouring out. The months of theft, the harassment, the recordings that were illegal, the lawyer I'd found, the threat Mark had just sent me. I'd been trying so hard to handle this alone, to prove that I could manage my own professional problems without dragging my family into it. But sitting in my apartment with my hands still shaking, I realized I'd been carrying this alone for far too long. My mom listened without interrupting until I'd finished. Then she said, come home this weekend. We need to talk about this in person. And bring your laptop. Mom, No arguments. Pack a bag. You're driving up Saturday morning. I wanted to argue. I wanted to insist I could handle this. But something in me cracked open, and I just said okay. The rest of Thursday passed in a strange haze. I didn't look at Slack. I didn't check email. I just sat in my apartment and tried to remember what it felt like to not be terrified of my own job. By Friday morning, I still hadn't heard anything officially from HR. No meeting scheduled, no formal write-up, no anything. Just silence. Which was somehow worse than the threats. I spent the morning organizing my documentation one more time, creating a second backup drive. Then I did something that made me feel physically ill. I checked the company's employee handbook that I downloaded months ago and reviewed the policy on recording conversations. Two-party consent state. The handbook actually mentioned it specifically. Employees should be aware that recording conversations without the knowledge and consent of all parties may violate state law and company policy. I'd violated both. And Mark almost certainly knew that I knew that. Which meant if I tried to use those recordings, he could flip the narrative entirely. I wouldn't be a victim, I'd be a criminal. Or at least, I'd look like one. Around noon, I got a call from an unknown number. My stomach dropped thinking it might be HR, but it was a voice I recognized from years ago, James, a friend from college who'd gone into corporate law. Hey, I heard through the grapevine that you might need some advice, he said carefully. Nothing official yet, but I wanted to check in. Word was already spreading. My career, which I'd worked so hard to build, was becoming a story people whispered about. How did you hear? I asked. Friend of a friend works in your company's accounting department. There's apparently some concern about Mark's expense reports. Has been for a while. My breath caught. Really? Yeah. Apparently nobody wanted to say anything because he's senior management and he's the type of guy who punishes people who question him. But if you're documenting things, you might want to know that you're probably not the first person he's screwed over. Just not the first one who's kept evidence. After we hung up, I sat with that information. Mark wasn't just my problem, he was a symptom of a bigger problem at my company. A culture where people like him could operate with impunity because people like me stayed quiet out of fear. That afternoon, I drove up to my parents' house early instead of waiting until Saturday morning. I couldn't stand being in my apartment anymore. I couldn't stand the silence of my phone, the weight of the hard drives, the certainty that Mark was at his desk right now crafting whatever narrative he was going to present to HR. My mom was waiting on the porch when I pulled into the driveway. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug, and I realized I was crying. I'd been holding it together so carefully for so long that I'd almost forgotten how to fall apart. That night, my parents and I sat at the kitchen table. My dad, who'd spent 30 years in human resources before he retired, listened to everything while my mom made coffee. First thing, my dad said when I'd finished, is that you need to understand something, going to HR doesn't protect you. It protects the company. They're not your allies here. They're damage control. That's what the lawyer said, I replied. She's right. But here's what they can't ignore, documentation. Written evidence. Proof. If you have that, and it's obtained legally, they have to respond to it. They won't want to, but they will have to. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. The question is, what do you actually want here? Do you want your job back? Do you want him fired? Do you want both? Because those are different paths, and they require different strategies. I hadn't let myself think that far ahead. I'd been so focused on just surviving day to day. I want him to stop hurting people, I said quietly. And I want my career back. My dad nodded, like this was what he expected. Okay then. Let's talk about how to make that happen. #chunk4. My dad pulled out a notepad, an actual physical notepad, not a laptop, and I realized he was being deliberate about it. No digital record of this conversation. Walk me through the documentation again, he said. But this time, I need specifics. What do you have that's legal? What do you have that's questionable? And what are you sitting on that could actually destroy you? I'd rehearsed this in my head 100 times, but saying it out loud to someone who actually knew the legal landscape was different. Scarier. More real. Legal stuff, I started. Emails where he takes credit for my work. I had the original drafts with my timestamps, and then his emails to senior management presenting them as his ideas. I have screenshots of him publicly criticizing my work in Slack, then sending me DMs later complimenting the same work. I have the threat he sent me yesterday about my future at the company. I have a pattern of similar behavior with at least 3 other employees who quit in the last year. I can't prove causation, but the timeline is clear. My mom made notes on her own pad. She'd always been better at organizing information than I was. That's solid, my dad said. What else? I have emails showing he requested I work on a high-visibility project for a client, then excluded me from the presentation meeting and presented the work as solo effort. The client even sent a thank you email to me specifically about my recommendations, and he never forwarded it or acknowledged it. I had my calendar showing I was pulled off that project with no explanation, and then the announcement that he was taking it over. Good. That's all good. That shows a pattern of financial impact. The company could have paid you commission or bonus on that work if he hadn't stolen it. What's questionable? Here's where my hands got shaky again. The recordings. My dad's face didn't change, but my mom's did. She shot him a look that said they'd already discussed this possibility before I arrived. How many? My dad asked quietly. 7 recorded conversations. All during work hours. All where he was saying things that were either discriminatory or threatening. 2-party consent state. Yes. He set down his pen. Okay. Those are radioactive. You cannot use those. Not in any official capacity. If you introduce them, everything changes. Suddenly you're not the victim, you're someone who was illegally recording your boss, and that becomes the story. The company's lawyers will make it the story. Mark's lawyers will make it the story. The recordings could contain him confessing to murder, and it wouldn't matter. The method would poison everything. So I just, don't use them. You use them, my mom said, and both my dad and I looked at her. You use them privately to verify that what you think happened actually happened. You use them to confirm your memory of events. But you don't tell anyone you have them. You don't reference them. And when you go to HR, you go with the legal evidence. That's right, my dad nodded. Those recordings are your insurance policy, not your weapon. The moment you mention them, you've admitted to breaking the law, and suddenly the conversation isn't about Mark's behavior, it's about whether you should face legal consequences. I felt the weight of it settle into my chest. I'd been so proud of having those recordings, so certain they were my proof. But they were actually my liability. What about the financial stuff? My dad continued. The expense reports. I don't have direct access to those. But James, a friend from college who's a corporate lawyer, mentioned that someone in accounting has concerns about Mark's expense reports. Apparently it's been an issue for a while. My dad's eyes sharpened. Did he give you specifics? No, just that it's something people whisper about. Don't pursue that, he said immediately. That's a rabbit hole that could actually bite you. If you start investigating Mark's finances or sharing rumors about his expense reports, you become the person spreading accusations rather than the person reporting documented harassment. Stick to what you can prove directly and personally. So what I actually have is strong, my mom summarized. The email evidence, the timeline, the witnesses who watched this happen. The witnesses are key, my dad said. Jessica and Derek, are they willing to document their own experiences? I haven't asked them. I've been trying to keep them out of this. That's noble and stupid, my dad said, not unkindly. If they've experienced similar treatment and they're willing to go on record, suddenly this isn't just about you. It's about a pattern. That's when HR actually has to act. But what if Mark retaliates against them? He will. Almost certainly he will. So before you talk to them, they need to know that. They need to make an informed choice about whether they're willing to be retaliated against. And if they are willing, they need to start documenting things from that moment forward, knowing exactly what they're signing up for. I felt sick. The idea of pulling Jessica and Derek into this, knowing it might torpedo their own careers. That's the real choice you're making, my dad said, reading my face. And I'm going to be very clear about this, you don't get to make it for them. They have to choose. But if you don't give them the option, you're also deciding that protecting them is more important than protecting future employees from Mark. That's your choice to make, but make it consciously. We sat in silence for a moment. My mom poured more coffee. Here's what I think you should do, my dad continued. First, you schedule the HR meeting. Don't wait for them to call you. You reach out to HR directly, not to Mark. You say you'd like to schedule a formal meeting to discuss your work situation. You're professional. You're calm. You're not emotional about it. I don't know if I can do that. You can. You've been doing a version of it for months. You're just going to do it one more time, except this time you're going to win. Second, he went on, before that meeting, you have a very careful conversation with Jessica and Derek. You tell them what you're about to do. You tell them exactly what you have. And you let them choose whether to participate. No pressure. No guilt. Just information. And third, you take everything you have, the legal documentation, and you walk into that HR meeting prepared to tell the truth. The whole truth. Everything. You don't minimize it. You don't apologize for it. You just present it as a professional documenting a hostile work environment. And then, my dad met my eyes. And then you see what happens. #chunk 5. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, listening to the house settle around me, running through every possible outcome until my brain felt like it was vibrating at a frequency that might shake me apart. My dad's words kept circling back, you don't get to make it for them. He was right, and that was the problem. Because Jessica and Derek weren't just my colleagues, they were my friends. And I knew exactly what I was about to ask them to do. I was asking them to paint targets on their backs. I was asking them to trust that the system would protect them when we both knew it wouldn't. I was asking them to sacrifice something I couldn't guarantee they'd get back. I drove back to the city early Friday morning, before my shift. I'd requested the day off, told my boss I was sick, which wasn't entirely a lie. I felt sick. My stomach had been in rebellion since Wednesday night. Jessica responded to my text immediately, coffee before work. We met at the place we always went, a small cafe 2 blocks from the office that Mark had never discovered. Jessica was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee and that expression she got when she knew something was wrong. She'd been my friend long enough to read the shape of my stress. Okay, she said before I even sat down. Whatever this is, I can tell it's big. I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, buying myself 30 seconds I didn't really have. I'm going to HR, I said. Today or Monday. I'm going to formally document everything that's happened with Mark, and I'm going to ask for an investigation. Jessica set down her coffee carefully, like she was suddenly very aware of its fragility. Okay, she said slowly. And you're telling me this because? Because I need to give you the option to do the same thing. Or not. It's your choice. Completely your choice. But you need to know what I'm about to do, and you need to know that when Mark finds out, and he will find out, he's going to retaliate. Against me. Probably against all of us. But especially against anyone who officially participates. I took a breath. He might fire you. He might demote you. He might make your job so miserable you have to quit. And I can't promise you that HR will protect you or that the company will back you up. I don't know what's going to happen. Jessica was quiet for a long time. She stirred her coffee even though she hadn't added anything to it. What exactly are you bringing to them? So I told her. I laid out the emails, the timeline, the pattern of behavior. I told her about Derek's departure and Sarah's and 2 other people whose names she probably didn't even remember because they'd left so quietly. I told her about the recordings I had and why I wouldn't be using them. I told her everything my dad had told me to tell her. When I finished, Jessica looked older than she had 5 minutes earlier. I want to ask you something, she said finally. And I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Are you doing this because you actually think it'll work, or are you doing this because you can't survive much longer? The question hit me like a punch I'd been bracing for but still hadn't managed to dodge properly. Both, I admitted. Mostly the second one. I can't keep going like this. But I also know that nothing changes if nobody says anything. And that's going to destroy other people after me. That's not really fair, you know, Jessica said, not unkindly. Making the choice to fight a battle because you're desperate and then framing it as noble. You're doing this for you. That's okay. That's actually the only reason that makes sense. So you won't? I didn't say that. Jessica pulled out her phone. Let me text Derek. I think the 3 of us need to talk. And I want to know everything you have, because if I'm going to do this, I'm doing it with my eyes open. My chest unclenched slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might be about to tank all our careers. Derek met us at the office during lunch, which was a risk but probably worth it. We locked ourselves in a conference room on the 4th floor, far from Mark's usual haunts, and I went through it all again. The emails. The timeline. The specific incidents where Mark had taken Derek's work and presented it as his own. The meeting where Mark had questioned Derek's competence in front of a client, and then later complimented Derek on the exact same work in a private message. He's done this to everyone, Derek said quietly. I thought it was just me. It wasn't just you, Jessica confirmed. He did it to me with the Henderson account. I spent 3 weeks developing their social media strategy, and he presented it to them as collaborative work he'd led. Okay, Derek said. Okay, I'm in. But I want to know what the plan is. I want to know exactly what we're walking into. So I told them about my dad's strategy. About documenting everything from this moment forward. About the conversation with HR. About the fact that we needed to do this together, or it wouldn't have the same impact. When? Jessica asked. Monday. Or maybe Tuesday. I need to get the documentation organized first, and I want to make sure we're all truly ready. I'm ready, Derek said. He sounded resolute. I'm tired of being gaslit. I'm tired of being made to feel like I'm losing my mind. Jessica nodded slowly. Yeah, me too. I felt something shift inside me, not relief, exactly. Relief was still weeks or months away, if it came at all. But something like the feeling you get right before you jump into cold water. The moment when you've decided, and there's no backing out, and somehow that decision feels like freedom even though you know it's going to hurt. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, *, when are you coming back to work? Mark is asking, *. I showed it to them. It was from one of Mark's assistants, someone I barely knew. He's looking for you, Jessica said quietly. I know. And we're really doing this. Yeah, I said. We really are. #chunk6. The weekend crawled by at a pace that defied the laws of physics. I'd expected to spend it organizing documents, preparing statements, steeling myself for Monday. What I actually did was oscillate between manic productivity and complete paralysis. Saturday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with 3 separate folders spread out in front of me, one for emails, one for incident documentation, and one for what I was calling pattern evidence, the things that weren't crimes on their own but became sinister when you saw them all together. The timeline of people leaving. The correlation between Mark's public humiliations and his subsequent credit stealing. The way he seemed to target high performers, people who might eventually outshine him. I'd been compiling this for months, but seeing it all laid out physically, printed and organized, made it real in a way that screenshots on my laptop never had. This wasn't just venting. This wasn't just keeping a record for my own sanity. This was ammunition, and I was about to use it. My mom found me there around noon, staring at the same email I'd been staring at for 20 minutes. Honey, you need to eat something, she said, setting down a sandwich I hadn't asked for. She'd learned not to ask if I wanted anything. She'd learned that the answer was yes even when I said no. I'm not hungry. I know. She sat down across from me, and I could feel her trying to figure out what to say. My parents had always been supportive, but this was different. This was their child about to walk into a building and systematically dismantle the life they'd managed to construct, even if that life was suffocating them. Your father's worried you're going to change your mind, she said finally. I'm not. He thinks you will. On Monday morning, when you wake up and realize what you're actually about to do, he thinks you'll find a reason not to go through with it. I looked at my mom. She had the same set to her jaw that I did when I was trying to be brave about something terrifying. What do you think? I think, she said carefully, that you're tougher than you believe you are. But I also think you're about to do something that's going to be harder than anything you've done before, and I'm not sure you're letting yourself understand how hard it's going to be. I understand. No, she interrupted, not unkindly. You understand it intellectually. But you don't understand what it feels like to be called a liar by a company that pays your bills. You don't understand what it's like to sit in an HR meeting and have someone imply that you're trying to damage a good man's reputation out of spite or incompetence. You don't understand the slow erosion of your confidence when people who used to be friendly suddenly start avoiding you because they don't want to be associated with the person who've made trouble. How do you know all that? I asked quietly. Because it happened to your Aunt Catherine. Different company, different boss, but the same basic skeleton of a story. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She did the right thing. And her life was harder for years because of it. But she also said it was worth it, eventually. Just, it took longer than she expected for eventually to arrive. I didn't sleep Saturday night either. Sunday wasn't much better. I kept picking up my phone to text Derek and Jessica, then setting it down because there was nothing left to say. We'd said it all. We'd made our choice. Now we were just waiting for Monday to arrive and transform choice into consequence. Sunday afternoon, Derek texted the group chat, nervous as hell. Anybody else, Terrified, Jessica responded. Same, I added, which felt like the understatement of the year. Good, Derek wrote. If we weren't scared, we'd probably be making a mistake. I held on to that through the night. Fear as confirmation. Dread as validation. Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of a deadline I couldn't negotiate. I wore my best blazer, the navy one that made me feel professional even when I felt like I was fracturing from the inside out. I did my makeup carefully, not too much, nothing that would suggest I was trying too hard or being emotional or any of the other coded language that got used to dismiss women who tried to take themselves seriously in professional spaces. I arrived at the office 40 minutes early. The building felt different somehow, even though nothing had changed. The carpet was the same carpet. The fluorescent lights buzzed the same buzzes. But it all felt like a stage set, like I was about to perform in a show where I didn't know all my lines. Derek was already at his desk when I walked past. He gave me the smallest nod, almost imperceptible to anyone not looking for it. Jessica arrived 10 minutes later, and she looked like she might throw up. I'd requested the HR meeting for 10 a.m. It seemed far away and impossibly close at the same time. At 8:47, my phone buzzed. Mark, where were you Friday? Need to debrief on the Westbrook account, I didn't respond. Anything I said could be used to show that I was still trying to do my job, that I was fine, that nothing was wrong. Better to let him wonder. At 9:15, Mark appeared at my desk. He looked irritated in that way he got when he couldn't immediately access something he wanted. You didn't respond to my message, he said. I was sick Friday. I'm better now. Well, we need to talk about Westbrook. Their campaign is launching. I'm meeting with HR at 10, I said. My voice sounded steady, which felt like a miracle. We can discuss it after that. Something flickered across his face. Confusion at first, then something darker. HR. Why? I'll explain after the meeting. He stared at me for a moment, and I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was trying to figure out what I knew, what I was going to say, how he could get ahead of it. The paranoia that narcissists got when they sensed they were losing control. Okay, he said finally, in a tone that suggested this was far from over. I guess we'll talk then. He turned and walked away, and I felt Jessica's eyes on me from 3 desks over. I didn't look at her. I couldn't afford to break now. The folders felt impossibly heavy in my bag as I headed toward the HR office, and my hands were shaking too much to hold my coffee cup steady. I set it down on an empty desk and took a breath. This was it. The point of no return, which I'd actually passed somewhere back in my childhood bedroom with my dad, but which felt completely real now, in this moment, with the clock ticking toward 10 a.m. Whatever happened next, I'd made my choice. Now I'd have to live with it. Chunk 7. The HR office was smaller than I remembered. I'd been here once before, years ago, for new hire orientation. I'd sat in one of these chairs and listened to someone explain benefits with all the enthusiasm of a person reading a phone book. Now the same generic motivational posters seemed to mock me from the walls. Teamwork makes the dream work, with a photo of people climbing a mountain. If only they knew. Jennifer Martinez, the HR director, was waiting for me with her assistant, a younger woman whose name tag read Alicia in bold letters. Jennifer looked the way HR directors always looked, professionally neutral, like they trained their face to be a blank slate that could accommodate any emotion without betraying a preference for any of them. Good morning, Jennifer said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Please, sit. I sat. My bag felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I'd contemplated just handing her the folders right away, establishing dominance through offensive positioning, but my therapist had suggested I start with words. Let them ask the questions. Let the documentation come as corroboration, not as an accusation. I'd like to file a formal complaint, I said, and the words sounded strange coming out of my mouth, like someone else was speaking through me. Against my supervisor, Mark Castellano. I have documentation of workplace harassment, discrimination, and what I believe to be financial misconduct. Jennifer's face didn't change, which was somehow worse than if she'd reacted with shock. She simply nodded and pulled out a form, her pen poised over it. Okay. Can you start by describing the nature of the harassment? So I did. I started with the public humiliations, describing specific incidents in detail. The March meeting where Mark had corrected my presentation in front of the entire department, suggesting I hadn't thought through the basic fundamentals when I'd actually spent 3 weeks developing the strategy. The time he'd told a client directly that my analysis was preliminary at best, when that same analysis had formed the foundation of their entire proposal. As I spoke, Alicia was taking notes. I could hear the pen scratching against paper. Jennifer asked clarifying questions that were technically neutral but somehow managed to feel accusatory, not toward me, but toward the complaint itself, like she was trying to find the holes in my story before anyone else could. And you witnessed this behavior from other employees? Jennifer asked. Multiple employees left the company under Mark's supervision, I said carefully. Derek Matthews and Jessica Huang both reported to him. They can verify. We'll conduct separate interviews if necessary, Jennifer interrupted smoothly. I want to focus on your experience first. You mentioned documentation. This was it. I pulled out the email folder first, maybe 50 pages thick. Emails where Mark had taken credit for my work verbatim, forwarding my analyses to clients with his name attached. Emails where he'd berated colleagues for minor mistakes while ignoring his own failures. One particularly damning thread where he'd written, "We need to make sure the newer staff understand that this is a professional environment," after I'd made a single typo in a presentation deck. Jennifer took them carefully, reading through the first few pages with an expression of mild interest, as though I'd just shown her someone's grocery list. When did you start collecting these? She asked. Months ago. When I realized there was a pattern. Did Mr. Castellano know you were keeping these records? No. Why didn't you come to HR immediately when these incidents occurred? The question hit like a slap. Because I didn't think anyone would care, I said, and there was an edge to my voice now that I hadn't meant to put there. Because I watched other people complain and nothing happened. Because I needed evidence before anyone would take me seriously. We take all complaints seriously, Jennifer said, in the tone of someone reading from a script. But without contemporaneous reporting, it becomes difficult to verify. It's all here, I interrupted, pulling out the second folder. The timeline of departures. The correlation between people who performed well and people who left. The instances where Mark presented my work as his own. I have emails, I have calendar invitations showing meetings I wasn't invited to but whose content I later found was stolen from my work, I have. I understand, Jennifer said, not unkindly. She was looking at me now instead of the documents. And we will review all of this thoroughly. But I do want to be upfront about something. My stomach dropped. What? Complaints like this are serious, and we take them seriously. But they're also complicated. HR exists to protect the company, first and foremost. If we substantiate claims of discrimination or harassment, the company becomes liable. There are legal implications. There are questions about whether the complainant might have ulterior motives, financial settlement, career advancement at the expense of colleagues, that sort of thing. I don't want anything, I said. I just want him to stop harassing people. That's what they usually say, Jennifer said, and then seemed to catch herself. I mean, that's what people typically report as their primary concern. But motivations are complicated. I'm not saying that's the case with you. I'm simply explaining how these things work. The room felt like it was getting smaller. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to present my evidence, and they were supposed to take it seriously, and Mark was supposed to be held accountable. Jennifer was supposed to be on my side, or at least neutral. She wasn't supposed to be implying that I was a gold digger with an axe to grind. I also need to inform you, Jennifer continued, that once we open a formal investigation, Mr. Castellano will be notified of the complaint and its general nature. He'll have the opportunity to respond. He may choose to have legal counsel present. And given that you'll both continue working at this company during the investigation process, things may become uncomfortable. More uncomfortable than they already are. I asked. Different uncomfortable, Jennifer said carefully. People take sides. Productivity decreases. And regardless of the outcome, there can be lasting professional consequences for everyone involved. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, intellectually I had, my mom had warned me about it, but sitting here in this small beige room with its motivational posters and its carefully neutral woman in professional attire, the reality of it suddenly felt suffocating. But you're still willing to proceed? Jennifer asked. I thought about Derek and Jessica. I thought about the people who'd already left. I thought about myself 3 months from now if I walked out of this office and did nothing, if I just let things continue the way they'd been. Yes, I said. I'm willing to proceed. Jennifer nodded and made a note on her form. All right. We'll begin our investigation immediately. In the meantime, I'd recommend limiting your interactions with Mr. Castellano to what's strictly necessary for work purposes. Document any additional incidents. And please don't discuss this complaint with other employees. Derek and Jessica are. I'm aware of who your close colleagues are, Jennifer said. Let's let the investigation process unfold naturally. The less discussion of this outside of proper channels, the better. I left her office 45 minutes later with my folders returned to me, my complaint filed, and a gnawing sense that I just set something in motion that I didn't fully understand. Mark was waiting by the elevators. Hashtag Chunk 8, The Reckoning. Mark was waiting by the elevators, and for a moment I almost convinced myself it was coincidence. Almost. Well, he said, his voice carrying that particular tone that made my stomach clench. Spending a lot of time with HR today, aren't we? Everything okay? His smile was practiced, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. He knew. Somehow, he already knew. I didn't answer. I just walked past him toward the elevator bank, but his voice followed me. Must be something serious to keep you up there that long. Performance review? Or are you finally admitting you need training? He laughed, and I heard the sound echo through the hallway. Other people turned to look. He'd orchestrated this deliberately, waited for me to emerge from HR so he could perform this little scene with an audience. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, I caught his reflection in the polished metal doors, still smiling. I should have been terrified. Jennifer's warnings about things becoming uncomfortable suddenly felt prophetic. But underneath the anxiety was something else, a clarifying sense of purpose. I'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. The only way out was through. The next 3 weeks were exactly as uncomfortable as Jennifer had predicted, but not in the way I'd expected. Mark didn't immediately retaliate. Instead, he became performatively professional in a way that was somehow worse than the overt harassment. He CC'd me on every email. He asked for my input in meetings, then ignored whatever I said. He assigned me to a project, then reassigned it to himself, crediting me in the most backhanded way. Thanks for the groundwork, but let me handle this from here. You look swamped. Every action was deniable on its surface but corrosive in its intent. I documented everything, just as Jennifer had instructed. Then, in the 4th week, HR launched the investigation into Mark's conduct. They interviewed Derek and Jessica, who both confirmed patterns of harassment and credit stealing. They interviewed other colleagues who reported experiences ranging from public humiliation to being excluded from key meetings. They reviewed years of email chains. They analyzed the timing of resignations against Mark's management of those employees. The evidence was airtight. I only knew this because Derek texted me after his interview. They asked me about like 5 different incidents. I think they're building a case. Don't say anything to anyone, but I think this is actually happening. What I didn't anticipate was what happened next. 2 days before the investigation was set to conclude, Mark submitted his resignation. Not asked for early retirement. Not negotiated a severance. Resigned, effective immediately, with a terse 1-sentence email to the executive team. I have decided to pursue other opportunities. Jennifer called me into her office to notify me formally. Mr. Castellano's employment has been terminated, she said. She still had that blank professional face, but there was something different in her tone now, something almost apologetic. His resignation was accepted. We've made the decision to offer you the opportunity to work with a different supervisor effective immediately. There will also be a transfer available within the marketing department if you prefer a fresh start entirely. That's it? I asked. He just resigned. He chose to resign rather than wait for the investigation to conclude, Jennifer said. Which, in my experience, usually indicates he understood the likely outcome. His severance agreement includes a non-disparagement clause and provisions regarding references. He's unlikely to be able to work in marketing again in this city, given what would come up in reference checks. It wasn't a public firing. It wasn't humiliation or a dramatic fall from grace. But it was effective. Mark had essentially been forced out, his career damaged beyond repair in our industry before he'd even left the building. But the most unexpected part came the next morning. An email arrived in my inbox from corporate legal, forwarded to me by Jennifer. It was addressed to Mark's personal email and CC'd to the regulatory authorities. The company was filing a report with the State Labor Board documenting the investigation findings. They were also conducting a separate financial audit prompted by some of the evidence I provided, evidence of Mark falsifying billable hours and inflating project costs to his clients. The email was professional and clinical, but the implication was clear: the company wasn't just letting him go quietly. They were documenting everything for the record. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my therapist. I had a cancellation, she said. Do you want to come in today? I did. Sitting in her office, I found myself unable to articulate what I was feeling. Relief? Vindication? Something more complicated than either. You did what you set out to do, my therapist said quietly. You protected yourself and the people who came after you. That took courage. It doesn't feel like courage, I said. It feels like I just documented things. And then HR did their job. You documented things because no one else was willing to. You went on the record knowing it would be uncomfortable. You didn't disappear or give up. That's the definition of courage, not feeling fearless, but acting despite the fear. A week later, I was transferred to a new team with a supervisor named Patricia who asked me in our first meeting how my previous role had gone and actually listened to the answer. She didn't just nod and move on. She asked follow-up questions. She seemed to actually care about my professional development. 3 months after Mark left, I was promoted to senior marketing coordinator, not as a reward, but because I'd actually earned it. My work spoke for itself without anyone stealing credit. My analyses were attributed to me. My ideas were discussed with my input valued. Derek reached out one day with news that he'd been promoted too. Jessica had already found a job at another company. Neither of them blamed Mark anymore, they'd moved past it into the forward motion of their careers. But they both acknowledged that what I'd done had mattered. It had prevented Mark from doing this to someone else. 6 months later, I found out through industry gossip that Mark had sued the company, claiming wrongful termination. The lawsuit was dismissed immediately. His reputation was destroyed. He'd moved out of the city to take a job in a smaller market at significantly lower pay. It wasn't revenge, exactly. It was accountability. I'd learned something in that beige HR office with its motivational posters and its carefully neutral HR director: sometimes the system works. Sometimes when you document abuse, when you refuse to be silent, when you believe your own experience matters enough to protect, sometimes that actually counts for something. I'd spent months wondering if I was crazy, if I was overreacting, if Mark's behavior was just how things were in the working world. Turns out, I wasn't crazy. And things didn't have to be that way. That made all the difference.